It is 11:30 and it's time to get started with Lunch with the League. I want to welcome you all, everyone who is attending today. I know it's different from our, in real life luncheons, but I hope you've prepared a nice climate friendly meal and you're preparing to sit back and enjoy this interesting topic. So before we get started, I'd like to just do a little bit of share a little bit of information about us and what the League is doing over the next few months. This is our third virtual Lunch with the League, and all of our meetings now and events are virtual for the foreseeable future. So I want to invite you to keep up with those on our website and or on our Facebook's event page because we always post those and links to these events there. So our next meeting, it's our annual meeting. It is on Saturday, June 20th, and it's an opportunity for members to come and participate in running the League. We get to discuss our program priorities for the coming year. We elect directors and officers, and it's a business meeting. So members get to vote. And so I invite all of our members to show up, and anybody else who wants to come and just see how the League is run, please feel free to join us on Saturday, June 20th. Our next Lunch with the League will be on Wednesday, June 26th at 11:30. You'll be able to sign up for that the same way you did this one. The topic that day will be the November elections, and our guest speaker will be Michael Vu, who, as you all know, is the Registrar of Voters here in San Diego County. So he will be giving us updates on new legislation and voting and vote by mail and how his office is going to run that for the county of San Diego for the November election. So that should be very interesting. As far as meetings go, you all know we have a lot of committees that meet monthly, and those meetings are on our calendar on our website. So I invite you to go to our website, lwvsandiego.org, and just click on calendar, and you can see what we're doing and see how to join us on those. There are three more items I just want to quickly mention. One is, I hope you've all filled out your census. That has been delayed a little bit due to the pandemic, but it's still very important that we all be counted because, as you know, census results provide information that allows us to redistrict our city and county. So, and that provides for our political representation. So it's really important that we all be counted and that all of our needs are met through the census and the redistricting commission. And speaking of, the redistricting commission is now taking applications for both city redistricting commissioners and county. So we have information on that for you. And let's see, is it on the screen, Kim? Let's take a look. Well, we can show that maybe at the end of the meeting. I'll put up some information on how you can find website information and click on and visit to either learn more about the redistricting commissions or to apply for them. And then finally, I just wanted to quickly mention, oh, there it is. Thank you, Kim. I just wanted to quickly mention that the League is a coalition member along with an organization called More Choice San Diego, and we are advocating to bring to your November ballot the opportunity for San Diegans to decide whether or not to have ranked choice voting, a specific kind of ranked choice voting on the November ballot. So we are advocating for that with city council members. So if you are interested in learning more, go to the website at morechoicesandiego.org, and you can learn all about our initiative and how we're doing it and what it means to San Diego. And you can advocate with your city council member if that sounds like something that you would be interested in. So we're really busy, and I invite you all to join us in all the work that we're doing and advocating with us. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started with the program by introducing our program co-chair, Kim Knox, who will get us started with today's luncheon.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with the public through our website. All attendees' microphones will remain muted. So if you think of any questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A icon on your Zoom screen to submit them. If you're having trouble hearing or seeing the webinar, please send us a message using the chat icon on your Zoom screen or using email, just reply to the Zoom reminder email that you received this morning. The topic for today's discussion is ending hunger through food waste. We'll also learn about how food waste affects our environment and what is being done to address increased food insecurity caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our first speaker is Elly Brown. Under her tenure as the executive director, the San Diego Food System Alliance has increased its organizational revenue by tenfold, expanded the network to over 120 groups, and launched 6 active working groups. While she was at Duke's MBA program focusing on social entrepreneurship and finance, Elly was inspired to commit to a career addressing complex societal problems in innovative and effective ways. Next, we'll hear from Elly's colleague, Sarah Feiteh. During grad school at SDSU, Sarah worked to develop programs addressing food and housing insecurity among college students. In 2017, while attending the Alliance's Food Waste Solutions Summit series, she became fascinated by the intersectionality of food waste and food insecurity and strove to get involved in these issues in the community. She joined the board of a local nonprofit and consulted on the development of the organization's first food rescue program. Sarah is now the program coordinator for wasted food prevention at San Diego Food System Alliance. Our third speaker will be Vince Hall, CEO of Feeding San Diego, the leading hunger relief and food rescue organization in San Diego County and an affiliate of Feeding America. Under Vince's leadership, Feeding San Diego is innovating creative new approaches to rescuing healthy food, which would otherwise go to waste, and providing more than 26 million meals every year to people in need. Vince has extensive nonprofit and public sector management experience, including serving as staff director for Governor Gray Davis and lecturing at San Diego State University. Now I'll turn it over to Elly Brown.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Elly Brown. Thank you so much, Kim, for the introduction. I am the Executive Director of San Diego Food System Alliance and really happy to be here today. Thank you so much for this invitation to co-present with our great partner, Feeding San Diego, Vince Hall. And we're really excited to share our work, what we can all do to support our food system and reduce food waste at this particular time. And I'll be covering the overview for a couple of minutes about our work in general and passing the baton over to my colleague, Sarah Feiteh, our in-house food waste expert. But before we start, I really wanted to thank the League for your leadership in our community. And I know that some of your members have been really involved with the People's Ordinance issue in the City of San Diego for quite some time. And I truly appreciate your commitment to ensuring that we have a sustainable and just community. So we wanted to start by explaining a bit about our work, San Diego Food System Alliance, because it's pretty unique. San Diego Food System Alliance is a powerful network of over 150 multi-sector organizations committed to cultivating a healthy, sustainable, and just food system in San Diego County. And Feeding San Diego is one of our Leadership Council members, which is a 40-member body that represents this 150 member group that we are working with. And together we support our local farmers and fishermen, ensuring that low-income communities have access to healthy food, quality food, and that nothing is wasted in the system in this region. We are committed to this community in San Diego, and the way we do this work is through 1, promoting cross-sector collaboration, 2, influencing public policy, and 3, influencing consumers and institutions to catalyze long-lasting changes. This current pandemic and the social distancing order is having tremendous impacts across the food system, from dramatic increase in food assistance needs, closure of food service businesses, layoffs and furloughs of workers in the system, with significant portion being immigrants and communities of color, and farmers and fishermen in our region needing to rapidly shift their sales models, if at all possible, to try to stay afloat. This crisis is truly exacerbating and exposing the vulnerabilities and inequities of our food system and the critical need to invest in support systems into the future. But, you know, today what we're excited to share, what's hopeful is that we can all take individual action to support the local food system at this time. We can purchase local, donate to relief funds, volunteer to support with food distributions, and conserve, reduce food waste, which we will talk more deeply about today. And our resource site on this slide has more information about great ways you can do this. And so my colleague, Sarah Feiteh, will now talk a little bit about the issue of food waste and what we can all do as individuals to be part of this solution.
Great. Thank you so much, Elly, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us. I'm really excited to talk to you all a little bit more about food waste, really what it is, why it matters, and what we can all do about it, to Elly's point of collective impact. So just starting off with quite literally our pie chart here in the United States, every year we throw away about 40% of all of our food. And a way that we really can think about this is, imagine yourself going to the grocery store, buying 5 bags of groceries, and then dropping 2 in the parking lot and leaving them there. That's essentially what we're doing today. And that 40% statistic is pretty staggering. And when we think about what food waste is, or a kind of a working definition that we can use to understand this idea, is food waste is really any food that was grown and produced specifically for the purposes of human consumption, but for a variety of reasons doesn't end up getting eaten and instead finds its way into the trash. And food waste can look like a lot of different things. Some of you may be familiar with the phenomena of dumpster diving, where people are actually, jumping into dumpsters behind restaurants or grocery stores and finding either perfectly good produce in there or maybe hundreds of prepackaged items. Food waste can be overproduction from buffets or from large events that have catering. Food waste can also be what we call imperfect produce. So that carrot that you see in the top right-hand corner of your screen is actually deemed too ugly to be put on a grocery store shelf or to be sold, even though in nutritional value and quality, it's perfectly fine to eat. Our own kind of individual habits. So if we have leftovers after a meal from eating out, or maybe from cooking at home and don't really have a plan for using those leftovers and those get tossed out. And then any food that maybe goes bad, or we find kind of something in our pantry that's really well past its date label. All of these are kind of different types of food waste. And when we want to think about where food waste is really coming from, food waste is actually being generated from all parts of the food system. And at the Alliance, we really like to take a food systems perspective for all of the work that we do. So from production, from manufacturing, storage and distribution, all the way to household, you can see kind of where food waste is coming from percentage-wise. And it's pretty clear that the majority of food waste, almost 70%, is really heavily skewed to the right here. So consumers and consumer-facing businesses are actually the greatest generators of food waste. Particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, though, we've seen kind of a lot of changes and impacts on food waste. Specifically with the production sector, farmers and large producers who are typically growing and producing for restaurants, schools, or kind of any large institutional kitchens, kind of right now are finding themselves without a market for their produce. And a lot of these farmers are actually, resorting to having to dump their milk, if they have a lot of eggs left over, tilling their produce back into the soil. So we've definitely seen kind of a lot of changes in food waste at the production level. And as we're all staying at home now, working from home, that also has an impact on our food waste behavior. So we definitely want to see over time what impact this has on food waste across our food system. But this kind of distribution gives us an idea that we can kind of create impact at all of these levels. And kind of the last question with this is why does this matter? Why should someone care about food waste? I mean, apart from the idea of having perfectly good food being thrown into the trash can being something that's of concern, we really like to talk about the idea that wasting food really is also wasting all of the resources that went into producing that food. And we can kind of break out the impacts of food waste into these 3 categories. So there are economic impacts of food waste when we think about what is really the financial cost of dumping all of this food into the trash can. And actually annually, the total dollar value of food being wasted is close to $218 billion. And if we think back to that previous graphic where households in particular are responsible for 43% of food waste being generated, we as consumers are also then paying kind of the highest price for this financial cost of food waste. So a family of 4 on average actually spends about $1,500 a year on food that ends up being wasted. And I'm sure a lot of us can kind of think of other ways that we'd like to spend $1,500 than just throwing it away into the trash. So there really is an economic impact to be made for food waste. The second is really environmental impact, particularly when we want to consider the impact of climate change. So if we actually went into any landfill in the United States and kind of just looked inside of one, you'd find that landfills are actually filled with uneaten food. Food is actually the single largest component of US municipal solid waste. And what happens when food just sits in landfill is that it rots and produces methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas that's actually more harmful to the environment than carbon dioxide. And so when we think about that implication on climate change, if food waste can actually be represented as its own country in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it would be considered the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind China and the United States, which is pretty staggering. And then, the third implication really are the social impacts of wasted food, and really what it means when we're throwing away 40% of our food, at the same time that we have members of our community that are going hungry or don't know where their next meal will be coming from. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that 1 in 7 San Diegans struggled with food insecurity. And I'm sure, Vince from Feeding San Diego can talk more about this, but, that statistic or the number of people needing food assistance has definitely increased exponentially. So it's kind of crazy to kind of think that both of these problems are existing at the same time. Having said all of that, we definitely don't want this to feel like something that is so daunting or really this insurmountable problem, but really taking kind of a solutions-oriented perspective as to what we can really do about food waste, both at a high kind of macro level, but also what individual actions can we take. But starting at that high level of what we can really do to address food waste, the Environmental Protection Agency has published what's called a food recovery hierarchy, which is kind of this inverted pyramid that you see here. And this is essentially a way to prioritize different strategies for not only how to prevent food waste, but also divert it from ending up in the landfill. And the solutions that are listed here are all listed kind of in order of impact. So solutions at the top of the pyramid, like preventing food waste from the source, from being created in the first place, have the greatest impact. And then kind of going down the list is if we can't reduce food waste at the source, looking at how we can, divert food waste from landfill into being used to feed people, feeding animals, returning it to the soil through composting, or maybe through innovative solutions like anaerobic digestion. So these are all kind of ways that we can work on reducing food waste and really, again, diverting it from landfill. And when we think about from a legislative perspective, the food recovery hierarchy is actually going to be really critical here in the state of California with SB 1383, which is actually legislation that specifies targets for reducing organic waste, which includes food waste, specifically for reducing methane emissions in the state. And what's really unique about SB 1383 is that it sets these really aggressive targets for reducing these organic wastes. Specifically by 2025, the state of California will be aiming to reduce their organic waste by 75%. And the component of food waste here is also by 2025 that 20% of all currently edible food that's being wasted will need to be recovered for human consumption. And that's where those strategies from the food recovery hierarchy are going to be really critical, with jurisdictions, really having to oversee different food recovery programs. So this is really great legislation that we have and an opportunity here in California to really make an impact on the issue of food waste, kind of at the state and policy level. And now shifting our conversation to thinking about, what can we do as individuals or as consumers? The San Diego Food System Alliance has a consumer education campaign that we call Save the Food San Diego, which is kind of really this call to action and a way to provide tips, tricks, and strategies for households for how they can reduce food waste at home. That website URL that you see at the bottom of your screen right now is actually our website that has a lot of great different tips, tricks, and information. And I'll be sharing a little bit about what we have available today, but I really encourage you all to check out our website and resources. So this is actually a poster from 1917 that really outlines different strategies and tips for reducing food waste. And we were really inspired by this kind of not only as a way to start thinking about what could food waste reduction look like today in 2020, but it really kind of goes to show that food waste isn't something that is a new topic. It's not something that we're all of a sudden just talking about, but that over 100 years ago, this was a conversation that was happening.
Wants to get in there when she's ready.
And people were really talking about how they can reduce their food waste. So we were really inspired by the 6 strategies that were listed here to kind of develop our own category of what food waste reduction tips could look like. And those are the 4 categories that you see here on the right-hand side of your screen. So smart shopping, zero waste cooking, meal planning, and then proper storage. Just for timing purposes today, we're going to focus on proper food storage. But again, I really encourage all of you to check out our website for information about all 4 of these categories. So particularly in light of COVID-19, probably most of us are really trying to minimize our trips to the grocery store now, just for health and safety, where maybe we're used to being able to go a little bit more frequently to pick up our food items. So proper food storage is actually going to be really essential to making sure that the food that we are picking up is going to help, is going to last longer instead of us finding something in the back of our fridge that we forgot about and having to throw it away. So storing your food properly is actually a great way to help it stay fresh, last longer, and then prevent it from being wasted. And what's interesting about proper storage is a lot of times the way that we purchase food in the grocery store or the way that we bring it back home is not actually the best way to store it in order for it to kind of have its maximum life. So like you saw in that image before, cilantro shouldn't be left in those plastic bags that we bring them home in, but it's actually better to store them in a jar with a little bit of water on the bottom, almost exactly the same way you would put flowers in a vase. The same thing with strawberries. Rather than leaving them kind of packed in their plastic containers, spread them out between paper towels in layers, and that's going to actually help them from getting soft or going bad in your fridge. And you can do this with actually any type of berry. Whole grain flours and nuts actually are best stored in the freezer, particularly with nuts because they have a high fat content. So if you leave them out for too long, they do have a tendency to go bad faster. So if you have a lot of nuts or a lot of extra flour, you can pop it into your freezer and then pull it out at a later time. Apples should actually be stored in your refrigerator because leaving them out at room temperature can actually speed up their ripening to about 10 times faster. So if you kind of aren't planning to use your apples right away, it's a great idea to maybe put them in your fridge so that they kind of stay fresh. Any extra butter, same thing with the whole grain flours and nuts, that would be great to go in your freezer. And then my personal favorite tip is how to store milk. In our house, we used to put our milk in the door of our refrigerator just because it was easy to access there and it fit so nicely into that space. But the door of your fridge is actually the warmest part of your entire refrigerator. So if you're putting milk or any kind of perishable dairy, it actually can go bad faster. And that's maybe why you're noticing your milk smelling a little off or going bad faster if you're putting it in the door of your refrigerator. So make sure that you're not putting it in the door and instead making sure that it goes kind of in the main compartment or the center part of your refrigerator. So that's kind of our conversation about food waste. And at the Alliance, we have an entire program focused on wasted food prevention. But we also want to consider what the Alliance is doing to think big across San Diego County and really kind of move the needle on a variety of food systems issues beyond just food waste. And again, going back to the COVID-19 pandemic and really thinking about how people are more aware now of our food system, what it is, where our food is coming from. People are really learning more about their local farmers and fishermen in the community. There's a big movement towards victory gardens where folks are looking to grow their own food and become more self-sufficient. Maybe we're spending more time in our kitchen cooking and preparing food. This has really brought food systems into a broader conversation. And like Elly mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic really has elevated a lot of the vulnerabilities within our existing food system. So we really see this as an opportunity to start talking about how we can uplift our current food system to one that is more sustainable and more just. And to do that, the San Diego Food System Alliance is really launching this 10-year strategic initiative specific to San Diego County's food system, which aptly we've called the San Diego County Food Vision 2030. We know that it's going to take time for the food system and for San Diegans to really recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, but we also recognize that this isn't an isolated situation, that really now there is a critical need to invest in support systems to create more resilient and sustainable food systems, structure and infrastructure for responding to any future crises that may develop. So we've already launched our Food Vision 2030 process. We've done a lot of research into looking at what our food system currently looks like and what are some of the needs and opportunities, strengths and weaknesses that have emerged from that. And what we're going into our next phase is really looking at engaging with hundreds of different stakeholders and engaging on a virtual basis with a community engagement strategy to hear from San Diegans specifically on what kind of their hopes or aspirations are for our food systems. Because what their hopes and visions are really reflect what the Alliance wants as well. So this is our timeline for what this project really looks like. And we want to kind of share some really concrete ways that you all can get involved in our Food Vision 2030 process. So we really invite you all to participate in our community engagement process once we launch that this summer. And we would love to partner with the League of Women Voters to really help get the word out there. And we're also in need of champions and donors to really help transform our work to shape our food system for the next decade. So the URL that you see here at the bottom is the link to our website that has more information about Food Vision 2030. So I definitely encourage all of you to check that out to see more about the work that we're doing. And that's where we'll be sharing a lot of the information regarding that community engagement that we'll be launching this summer. And with that, I'd just like to thank you all for your time. And I know that there'll be a Q&A panel at the end of the presentation, and be happy to answer any questions at that time.
Thanks very much, Sarah and Elly. That was really interesting. And I know we're really glad to have your organization already on the ground, ready to roll when something like this pandemic hits. Next is going to be Vince Hall, and then we'll go back to Lori for the Q&A.
Very good. So hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of today's webinar. My name is Vince Hall. I'm the CEO of Feeding San Diego. We are the largest food recovery and distribution organization in San Diego County. I really want to thank Kim Knox for organizing today's presentation. It's a great opportunity for organizations like the Food System Alliance and Feeding San Diego to help get the word out to the community about what's going on and what's being done to both address hunger and address the environmental consequences of food waste. I personally have a nice background with the League. In my previous capacity as the Executive Director of Future of California Elections, I worked very closely with the late Trudy Schaefer from the Sacramento office on state policy issues related to election reform, and of course worked very heavily back in 2010 and 11 with Gene Brown and others on redistricting initiatives to empower underrepresented communities through the redistricting process. So in a variety of capacities. I've been involved with the League and really enjoyed the great friendships and relationships that have been built, and especially the great public policy achievements that have been achieved. So to be reconnecting with you today as CEO of Feeding San Diego is a great pleasure. Feeding San Diego is proud to be one of the founding members of the Food System Alliance, and I thank Elly and Sarah for the great information that they provided as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of hunger in San Diego County, the impacts of hunger, and especially the good work of Feeding San Diego in addressing the problem of food waste. Starting with hunger, prior to COVID-19, our annual Map the Meal Gap study, which we do in consultation with our national organization, Feeding America, found that the hunger rate in San Diego County was about 1 out of every 8 people, which is really a staggering amount. I mean, it's over 400,000 people. And tragically, the rate of food insecurity was even higher amongst children, with about 1 out of every 6 youth in our county just not being sure where their next meal is going to come from. And you'll hear us use the term food insecurity from time to time, and really what that reflects is the lack of consistent access to healthy, nutritious food. Now, because of COVID-19, and obviously I'm speaking to the economic crisis that has resulted from COVID-19, with the county's unemployment rate now nearing 30%, the demand for service at our 300 plus distribution locations across the county has absolutely soared. And many of the distribution sites have seen anywhere from a 100 to 400% increase. I spoke with an executive director of a local nonprofit that's one of our food distribution partners, and she said they have seen a 600% increase in the number of people showing up and looking for hunger relief services. So we're conservatively estimating that the hunger rate in San Diego County now has reached 1 in 6 people, but all of the anecdotal evidence that we have suggests that the rate is even higher. And yet, as was said by Sarah, 40% of our food gets thrown away. 40% of the food goes to waste. Now that is more than enough to solve the problem of hunger. Technically, 40% of America's food production is enough to solve global hunger. Logistically, obviously that presents certain complications, but it should be well within our means to solve hunger domestically, given the amount of food that we produce, package, ship, store, and then throw away. Hunger in our county affects all kinds of people. And I would say that one of my primary challenges is to kind of dispel the mythology about hunger. And people almost synonymously associate hunger and homelessness. And so they think when you're an anti-hunger organization, you're feeding the homeless population. Well, about 10% of the food we distribute addresses the homeless population. And we're very proud to be playing such a critical role in that incredibly, incredibly important social challenge of solving homelessness. But about 90% of our food is going to people who are doing everything within their power to avoid becoming homeless. And that includes the categories you see here, for children, to families, seniors, college students, veterans and military families, and people facing homelessness. I testified before Congress in January regarding active duty military and veteran hunger in San Diego County. We have the largest concentration of military families of anywhere in the United States. And so these problems are more prevalent here. We also have a cost of living that's 40% higher than the national average. And so a lot of these military families, they don't choose to live in San Diego. They're stationed here. They report for duty here. And then they're thrown into a housing market that is absolutely brutal for folks who are trying to survive on a junior enlisted salary, grades E1 through E6. And then tragically, the military families that are being thrown out into our community are being given supplemental pay called a BAH, or a basic allowance for housing, which is supposed to help them find housing. It's not enough money to find housing in San Diego. So, but then they count the BAH as income for purposes of disqualifying those families from eligibility for food stamps or CalFresh. So it's really an awful situation, and we're doing everything we can to advocate in Washington, D.C. for a solution to that problem. But in the meantime, we're operating special distributions across the county just for active duty military and veteran families. In the same way that we have special programs for seniors, we operate 40 K-12 school pantries on a twice-a-month basis to feed school kids. We have special initiatives for lots of different populations. East County has a lot of rural hunger, and we are shipping food to 10 different disparate East County communities. This is a visual statement about the COVID-19 crisis. This is one of our weekly distributions at SDCCU Stadium in Mission Valley, formerly known as Qualcomm Stadium. And we are seeing, over 1,000 cars nearly every Saturday coming to the stadium. And that's just one of 5 mega distributions that we do. We have 5 large regional drive-through distribution sites, in addition to the 300 normal distribution sites that we operate. Some directly by Feeding San Diego and some in partnership with local faith-based or charitable organizations. But, this is truly without modern precedent. 490,000 San Diegans are unemployed. At least 430,000 have lost their jobs just since March 15th. And then grocery prices are going up. So for families that were already struggling to balance their monthly budgets, the situation has just gotten even more difficult. So this matters in a lot of different ways. And I know it's intuitively obvious that hunger is a problem, but you have to think about academic achievement, cognitive and physical development, social and behavioral responses, workforce preparedness, health and well-being. Across the spectrum, there are so many negative impacts of hunger. Somebody once said that a fed person can have many problems, but a hungry person only has one problem. And that's because hunger is so debilitating. It has such a significant negative impact on people's preparedness for dealing with life's challenges. And until you address hunger, it is unreasonable to expect people to navigate and succeed at any of the other challenges that they face in their day, whether it's education or healthcare or finding a job or finding housing. It's just not reasonable to put those burdens on people. And yet we meet so many families every day across this county who are making these absolutely brutal decisions about whether they're going to buy food or pay for the rent, or they're going to buy food or pay for their medicine, or buy food or renew their bus pass. These are hard, difficult choices that people are having to make, because before COVID-19, the cost of living in this county was, and the wage structure was not supporting the idea that working hard creates middle-class life. With COVID-19, we've seen this almost 30% unemployment rate, and that has dramatically increased the number of people making those tough economic choices. As Sarah was talking about earlier, the environmental consequences of food waste are also enormous. I mean, the human toll is one thing, and the environmental toll is yet another thing, because 8% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally are attributable to food waste. And if you look at any landfill in California, food waste is not only one of the leading generators of CO2 emissions from that landfill, but it's also one of the leading generators of methane gas. And when you look at those two gases, they are so destructive. But as Sarah indicated, methane is 50% or worse for the environment. And we are doing a very positive and good thing by rescuing food that would otherwise go to waste and getting it to families in need. But even if food rescue wasn't the solution to hunger, even if we were able to wave our magic policy wand and have the SNAP or CalFresh program provide every resident of our state with sufficient nutrition, we would still have to come to grips with the problem of food waste, because we're never going to deal with climate change effectively until we address the problem of food waste, because it is such a massive and significant component of the greenhouse gas challenge. So this is Feeding San Diego's mobile pantry vehicle. This is an example of how we bring food out to rural communities. Before COVID, in normal times, whatever that means, we would have food out on tables. We would create a free farmers market-like experience for families. And this is only half of the distribution. The other half of the vehicle would have shelf-stable products, canned and boxed staple items. But we put a very special emphasis on fruits and vegetables, because even families that have some money to spend toward their monthly budget for food are typically going to buy the cheapest carbs per dollar they can get their hands on. They're going to buy very inexpensive canned and boxed foods. And most of those foods aren't particularly healthy. You're going to see a lot of carbs, a lot of sugar, a lot of salt. And so we have really made a special push to provide fresh fruits and vegetables as part of our distributions. And we've sustained that during this COVID-19 crisis. But typically 80% of what flows through our distribution center is fresh fruits and vegetables. The mission of Feeding San Diego is to connect every person facing hunger with nutritious meals by maximizing food rescue. And I sometimes get asked, what makes Feeding San Diego different? What makes you so innovative? And really, it's this whole concept that we're not just a hunger relief organization. We're a hunger relief organization that is squarely centered on the idea that food rescue holds the key, holds the answer. And I can talk more about that in a minute. The vision of Feeding San Diego is a hunger-free and healthy San Diego. That's a very deliberate wording. We didn't just say a hunger-free San Diego, we said a hunger-free and healthy San Diego, because we want to make sure that we're not just churning out carbs, we're not just pumping out canned and boxed foods into the community, but that we're really mindfully and thoughtfully engaging in menu planning to help families in need to have nutritious, wholesome foods to nourish themselves and their kids. We break down our work into 3 pillars: feed, rescue, and unite. I'm just going to take a moment to talk you through each of those. This is a map showing all of Feeding San Diego's distribution points across San Diego County that are open to the general public. And that's a really important caveat. We do not put on this map, which is on our website, distribution points that are closed to specific communities, because we don't want to create the impression to the general public that it's in their interest to go to these sites and then be turned away because they don't meet certain eligibility requirements. But on this map, there's 3 colored dots. The yellow dots are distributions that are operated by partners of Feeding San Diego. The teal dots are direct distributions operated by us, as are the red dots, except that the red dots are specifically youth meal sites where prepared meals are being provided to those under the age of 19 through a special federal program. Included in this map are the regional emergency distributions I talked about earlier. We have 5 of those throughout the county. And we have our rural mobile pantry sites that you can see throughout East County, where many seniors live on fixed incomes. They do not have access to cheap groceries. They can't go to a grocery outlet or a Food for Less. Many of them do not have transportation, and if they did, they couldn't afford to drive down to Alpine or El Cajon or Escondido every week to get groceries. So the rural food pantry network that we operate is incredibly important to our work. Since the COVID-19 crisis started in mid-March, we have provided 4.5 million meals across San Diego County, and the rate at which we're able to provide those meals is increasing with each passing week. So a little bit about food rescue. There's 4 ways that we rescue food. We have an extensive in-county food rescue apparatus. We also rescue a lot of food from outside of San Diego County. We rely a little bit on purchased food in normal times, and we typically don't get any government commodities. So let me tell you a little bit about that. Here in San Diego County, we are right now rescuing food from 530 locations across the county, most on a weekly basis. I'm sorry, on a daily basis, most on a daily basis. That includes 228 retailers. A lot of those are grocery stores like Ralph's and Food for Less and Target and Costco, Walmart, Sam's Club, Barron's, Aldi, Target. So there are many, many chains that are partnered with Feeding San Diego in this process of donating surplus food. We also rescue food from local San Diego County farms and brokerage houses. We rescue food from 43 food manufacturers in San Diego County. We piloted a Starbucks food rescue program here in San Diego County at a single store, and then it expanded to where now we rescue food from 207 Starbucks stores across our county every night of the year. And that San Diego pilot is so successful that it is now in 60% of the Starbucks stores across the United States. And they had me at their annual shareholder meeting in Seattle to announce that they're going to take the San Diego pilot to 100% scale across every store in the United States by the end of this calendar year. So that's a very, very big win. We get about 750,000 pounds of panini sandwiches and breakfast sandwiches and protein boxes with salads and eggs and fruit and cheese. We get fresh fruit, we get dairy products. So we're getting a lot of really good food. We partner with San Diego Unified and rescue food from 19 kitchens. We have other donors like the Dole Produce Company, and you see those large yellow ships by the convention center. We get fresh bananas off of those ships on a regular basis. So this system of food rescue has declined about 30% with COVID-19 because of the high consumer demand. Consumers are clearing food off the shelves. But we are responding to that by importing more produce from outside of San Diego County. This graph shows the increase in food imports through the California Association of Food Banks. Now that gives us access to rescuing produce from 225 farms and packing sheds up and down the state of California. And we get that produce for two reasons. Either the farmer has grown it and there's no buyer for the crop, or the packing shed has sorted out that product because it's odd sized or odd shaped or odd colored. In both scenarios, this is perfectly good, brand new, fresh off the field produce, and we're getting it here to San Diego. We often pay the cost to harvest, we pay the labor cost to pull the crop off the field, we pay the packaging cost, and we pay the shipping cost, but it's still a fraction of what it would cost for us to buy that wholesale. One of the big changes with COVID-19 has been the increased reliance on purchased food. So typically, Feeding San Diego would purchase 2 truckloads of food per month. But over the last 2 months, we've purchased 162 truckloads of food. So 161 truckloads when this slide was developed at a cost of over $5.5 million. So that's all food that we have purchased from the wholesale food system, trucked into San Diego County and pushed out through our 300 distribution sites in response to COVID-19. Typically, we don't support a purchased food model, we support a food rescue model, but we got hit with a 30% decline in the rescued food quantity. At the same time, we had a massive increase in the number of people seeking relief. And so we made this investment in purchased food to get us over this hurdle. And hopefully people will be through the unemployment insurance process, through federal unemployment supplements, through pandemic EBT program, through the $1,200 stimulus check, through the economy slowly reopening. Hopefully we will get through this period of heightened demand and be able to return to a food rescue focus. Finally, within our Unite pillar, we do unite the community in this mission, and we have typically 14,000 volunteers per year that come through this distribution center helping us do our work. We run 15 volunteer shifts a week. Currently, because of the heightened health awareness associated with COVID, we are only accepting volunteers who are 18 and up and have a food handler card issued by the county. But there are many community organizations across the county who are seeking help at the distribution points. And there are online resources like handsonsandiego.org to help locate those volunteer opportunities. We are receiving food donations, and we welcome those food donations. We ask that people not specifically go out to buy food to donate. If somebody spends $1 on a can of food, we get 1 can of food. But if they gave us the $1 instead of the can of food, we could turn it into 4 complete nutritious meals for a family in need by investing that $1 in our countywide food rescue network. So, but where food manufacturers or families just want to donate food, we welcome that. Just a quick snapshot on Feeding San Diego. We are the 13th largest charity in San Diego County, according to the San Diego Business Journal ranking of nonprofits. We are the largest nonprofit that is singularly dedicated to hunger relief. Our revenue last year was about $51.1 million. We are going to very substantially grow that number at the conclusion of this fiscal year because of COVID-19 related fundraising initiatives. We ask people to unite with our mission by helping to spread the word on social media, and we have a social media toolkit that you can use to help spread this message through the community. And then most importantly, we have a special page on our website dedicated to coronavirus relief, and it makes it very easy for people visiting feedingsandiego.org to immediately go to that food finder map with all those dots, and they can double click and zoom into their neighborhood and see distributions that are proximate to their home. There are contact phone numbers if they want to call and confirm information about a distribution before they go. We actually got fined by our internet provider because our food finder map is being so heavily utilized that it exceeded our bandwidth that we pay for each month. So I said, great, I'm happy to pay that fine every month, or let's increase our license use, because people are finding food through that tool. And then there's other ways to get involved, including making a gift or donating food, etc. So I just want to thank you all very much. I look forward to the question and answer. I thank you, Kim, for organizing this great opportunity for Feeding San Diego and the Food System Alliance to show not just the seriousness of the challenges that we face, but also the incredible opportunity that we have to use food waste as an asset for doing so much good in the community. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Vince. That was so impressive, and your organization does such great work. I've actually toured your facility before, so those photos brought back some memories of that. I
Great.
appreciate Sarah and Elly too for their remarks here today. And Vince, while I have you on, I was just going to call attention to your reference of the work that the league has done. Particularly, you were mentioning Jeannie Brown. She is a past president, and she's currently the co-chair with Kim of the program committee. And she was instrumental, as you mentioned, in bringing the redistricting commission to San Diego, which has now become kind of a blueprint for the rest of the state. So that was really great work, and I appreciate your calling our attention to Jeannie for that.
Oh, she put a lot of time and energy into that
Yeah,
into that process.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get to the Q&As now, and this is our third Lunch with the League on this platform, and we've solicited feedback on our previous luncheons, and some of the feedback we've gotten has been that these luncheons have run a little bit long, and I totally get it. This is a very different platform. You know, we're usually at these luncheons, we're sitting together and enjoying each other's company in real life and sharing a meal together, and that's a very different experience than sitting in front of your computer for 2 hours. So I'm going to try to be mindful today and make sure that we keep up with the time and don't tax our attendees too much on this. But I did want to take a few questions. We have 4 or 5, and I'd like to actually throw this out to both of you, Vince and Sarah. You know, Vince mentioned the other organizations such as ours that he has worked with in the past. And so I just wondered if you could both kind of give us a little sense about how broadly your organizations interact with the community and via other nonprofits and food rescue organizations, or just feeding and food resource organizations, and to tell us if that relationship has grown or if you've expanded your organizational outreach into our communities.
Sarah, would you like to start?
Sure. So like Elly mentioned, kind of when introducing the Alliance, we really are a network organization with, you know, over 150 partners and stakeholders within within that network. And those organizations really span, you know, all the way from government entities, jurisdictions, schools, businesses, nonprofits. We really see kind of taking, you know, action on food systems issues really requires that collaborative approach. And so we see it as really critical to be able to engage with the various sectors in our community. So, you know, for-profit, nonprofit businesses, small community-based organizations. I know specifically for our working groups within our wasted food prevention working group, you know, we have both of the food banks participating in that working group. We have small gleaning organizations. We have social enterprises that are kind of innovating the way for how to transport prepared food and get that to folks that are in need. So the Alliance really has it as one of our priorities and kind of arms of our work is to continue to develop our network. And that's something that, you know, from the inception of our organization that we've been doing, and particularly in light of COVID, where, you know, we are going to be needing a lot of cross-sector collaboration in order to address some of the emerging needs. And as we embark on kind of our Food Vision 2030 process, with our community engagement process, reaching community groups and individual community members is something that we're definitely looking to do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you. And I would say we could not do what we do without our community collaborations. I mean, we rescue over over 13 million pounds of food per year here in San Diego County. And almost all of that food rescue is done by us partnering local charities with local donors so that the food stays in the local community. You know, one of the many ways that Feeding San Diego is different from traditional food banks that I meet with across the Feeding America network is that we don't bring all the food into a central hub and then have charities drive vehicles to the hub facility and withdraw the food and pull it back. We actually partner our local charities with local food rescue opportunities. So Oceanside Food stays in Oceanside and Chula Vista Food stays in Chula Vista. We couldn't do that without the 170 faith-based and charitable organizations that engage in this work with us. We then invest in their capacity. So we recently bought a $10,000 walk-in cold storage unit for Community Through Hope. We recently bought a series of vans, which we gave to Brother Benno in Oceanside. We gave to Bridge of Hope these vans that are specially equipped for food rescue. We've purchased shelving, we've purchased refrigeration. So we're building the community's capacity for food rescue. and not just looking at it myopically as how can we make our food bank big and better, but how we can make a countywide diversified system more efficient. And then we couldn't do it also without the corporate partnerships that we have that bring funding and volunteers. Every organization from Qualcomm to Illumina to every bank, real estate, you know, Intel, Google, Apple, they all come and volunteer. They all help provide needed funds. And then we rely on organizations like the League to help get the word out, to help educate the public about the fact that people don't need to go hungry. We have enough food to feed everybody. And there's no scarcity of food, there's a scarcity of organization. We don't have a food problem, we have a distribution problem. And Feeding San Diego is attacking the problem from that lens.
Yeah, perfect. That makes a lot of sense. It makes it very efficient and collaborative. Okay, well, we actually got a question via email prior to today's event, and we also have some questions that have been generated since we've been presenting this topic today. So I'm going to read one of the ones that came in earlier today, earlier prior to today's event. How do we know which food banks or food charities to contribute to are the most effective ones, such as low operating costs? And do either of you know or care to comment about Jose Andres, the World Central Kitchen? That came from, like I said, an email that was submitted prior to this.
So I think that there are a lot of boutique programs out there. There are a lot of folks who are doing things either on a one-time basis or they're doing things on a limited scale. And I would say as a potential donor to any hunger relief organization, you want to ask yourself, is this scalable? Is this something that can actually grow and enhance and increase to solve the problem of hunger across the county? I would also learn about 990s, which are the IRS documents filed by charities that peel back the cover and show you inside as a taxpayer what these nonprofit organizations are raising, how much they're spending on overhead, and how much is actually going right into the programs that they're operating. Most nonprofits will put right on their website their audited financials, their 990, and their annual report. And you'll certainly find multiple years worth of all three of those on Feeding San Diego's website. So I think as a donor, it's a great question to ask. You should do your homework. You should see how they're funded. Then you should ask about their business model and figure out, is this a lot of money going to serve a small number of people, in which case it's not really scalable? Or is this a small amount of money that's serving a large number of people and is scalable?
That's a good point. Sarah, did you want to jump in or should we just move to the next question?
I think Vince's answer was great. So if there are other questions, I'd love to be able to get those in.
We have just a few more.
Sure.
So I think, Sarah, this one actually refers to one of your particular slides on your presentation.
Sure.
When you're making imperfect produce, one of the questions is, where can we buy that produce?
That's a great question. I'd say there's a couple different ways to get that, you know, thinking about kind of keeping our food local and how we can really implement local solutions. One of the easiest ways is if you go to your local grocery store or even farmer's market, you can ask them if they have any of this imperfect produce or anything that's currently not on display because the store has deemed it, you know, not sellable just because of the way it looks. And quite a few store managers are actually willing to let folks buy that produce at very discounted rates. So that's a great way to start, you know, just walk into your local grocery store and maybe ask that question and see what's available there. If that isn't an option or you aren't finding that that's a possibility, you can also kind of join what's called a community supported agriculture subscription. They're basically kind of like these farmers boxes that get delivered to you. It's sourced from local farmers and producers. So it's food that's coming organically, you know, from local farms. So that's a great way to also kind of get access to imperfect produce. And then I guess a third way is there's actually a national organization called Imperfect Foods. They actually started as Imperfect Produce, where they were kind of rescuing these ugly fruits and vegetables from farmers and producers and then creating these boxes that you could sign up for on a subscription basis and get mailed. And they've recently expanded their services now to include imperfect foods. So they have grains that they can include now, so rice, quinoa, things like that. Sometimes they even have dairy products. And in that case, it's not that that product is is bad or unsafe to eat, but sometimes, you know, a farmer has too much or excess, so they can funnel it into the imperfect foods channels. So that's also a great way that you can maybe get started with kind of your first venture into imperfect foods or produce. So those are all ways that you can actually do that.
Great, thank you. Well, while we're talking about farmers and farming and that process, we do have another question regarding essential workers and the cross-border workers from Mexico who typically have come in the past to be on the fields and the farms working with the farmers. Do either of you have any insight into that, the ability of those workers to continue to work and whether or not that production has fallen off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, kind of like we're talking about just in general, you know, COVID-19 exposing the vulnerabilities of our food system, really this immigration component where a lot of our, you know, farm laborers and food workers rely on those temporary work visas in order to be able to do that work, and how these policies can affect that. And, you know, specifically with food waste, if you know, you don't have the labor to be able to pick the food off of the fields, get it to the markets, you know, there's a food waste issue really to be considered from that lens. I do know that there are workers that are still allowed to continue to receive those temporary work visas so that they can continue their work. But I think it has brought into kind of this larger conversation around, you know, what are the needs of our food workers and our farm workers, and how are these greater policies affecting their ability to come do this work, and how does that affect our food system as a whole?
Thank you. Vince, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I second everything Sarah just said.
Okay.
I would just add there are serious disruptions going on in the food system from a variety of reasons, and a lack of consistent access to labor for harvesting crops and for operating processing facilities is a serious threat to the food system in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. This one's a little bit expansive, and perhaps you may not know the answer to this, but I'm going to read it as it came in. I realize that composting is the last resort to decrease food waste, but what are San Diego area trash collectors doing to collect food for composting?
That's a great question. This really goes back to that legislation I was talking about with SB 1383, really revolutionary in a lot of ways. And one of the components of SB 1383 is that jurisdictions, so individual cities, will actually be working with their local waste collectors. So for example, City of Poway with EDCO, they'll be working on either providing residents with extra bins, either specifically for food scrap collection, or what's called mixed bins, so that you could put your green waste, what you would typically put into your green bins, you can actually now include kitchen or food scraps with that. So SB 1383 really is going to kind of amplify and allow households to be able to include their organic food waste with their green waste and allow that to be picked up. EDCO is also actually building an anaerobic digestion facility here in San Diego. And so that's kind of one kind of channel or funneling where that food waste can go. So SB 1383, in addition to kind of those food recovery targets and general kind of organic waste reduction targets, is really going to be providing residents and households with either extra bins or new labeled bins for folks to be able to put their or their food recycling in. And jurisdictions will be kind of providing education, community workshops in order to kind of share that information with residents and make sure that folks are aware of that.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, we really should not be looking at the waste haulers to solve the problem of food waste. They're the last step in the process. Their job is to destroy the food, either in an anaerobic digester, which there are serious environmental concerns about that approach, or just by putting it in the landfill, which obviously creates problems and creates violations of the law. So California is really, once again, in a leadership role in environmental issues by telling local jurisdictions and companies that they're going to be fined if they put organics in our landfills, and food waste is the biggest component of those organics. So really, the strategies that Sarah talked about in her presentation are the key. That is to rescue this food, to minimize household waste, to minimize retail waste, to minimize at every point in the supply chain, to reduce food waste, so that the smallest amount of food possible ends up defaulting to the waste haulers.
Great. Yeah, good points. Here's one regarding schools. You know, as we all know, because of the pandemic, schools closed earlier. Typically, your summers might be different. from your regular school days, because a lot of children and other family members even perhaps have access to regularly scheduled meals that are provided to them. And as you know, with the schools closing in March, there probably are a lot of hungry children out there who don't have access. So this question is regarding the school closures and how that affected your organization and how you do your work.
So we typically operate school pantries at 40 K-12 sites, from San Ysidro in the south to Oceanside in the north. And these are twice a month farmers market style distributions. They're free. And the families of these schools, which are 80 to 100% qualified for free and reduced federal meals, come onto the campus and shop and bring home fresh produce, fruits and vegetables, and other staple items. And they've really been a lifeline. We never meant the school system of this country to be the primary source of child nutrition, yet that's what it has become. And so our school pantries are trying to address the family hunger that's occurring in the households of those kids who are so now heavily dependent on school breakfast and school lunch. We also operate school meal programs, which allow youth to get a complete nutritious supper after school before they go home. And that's through a federally funded program. So kids at Hoover High go to the Copley Price YMCA and they get access to these meals. And that means that these kids get 3 meals a day instead of just the 2 school meals. We are committed to youth hunger. And during the summertime, we have our Fuel for Summer campaign, which actually we're just starting this week. But the Fuel for Summer campaign aims to create a very vibrant, robust system of countywide food distributions to offset to the greatest extent possible what kids are losing by having the schools closed for the summer months. There is a summer food service program, SFSP, and we operate SFSP sites across the county, as do many other nonprofits and schools, school districts. And that's a critical tool for helping to address youth hunger during the hard summer months, because we want those kids coming back in September nourished and ready to learn. We've used special waivers in the last 8 weeks from the state and federal government to allow us to open those SFSP sites and our after-school supper sites as drive-through lanes. And so this is normally absolutely prohibited by federal law, but we're able now, and we're doing across the county drive-through lanes, and the youth don't even have to be in the car. The adult in the car simply attests to the number of kids in their family, and that number of meals is passed through the car window, and then we get to the next car. At many of those sites, we're also providing a supplemental box of food to try to address the hunger needs of the parents and others in the household. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution to youth hunger, particularly in those hard summer months, but we are rapidly growing a number of strategies across the county to make sure that the kids have access to the nutrition they need.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a definitely expanded that problem with this early closure at the schools, for sure. Well, we have actually 2 questions that relate to food rescue at restaurants. So they're a little bit different, but essentially, in general, for example, this luncheon would normally have been conducted at Tom Ham's Lighthouse Restaurant. We would have provided our attendees a buffet of food options that they would have chosen and eaten. We're pretty careful, as is the restaurant, to make sure that we provide the amount of food for the number of people that we expect to attend or who have registered, but invariably we have leftovers. And so we understand from Tom Ham's that because those leftovers are in a buffet circumstance, that they are not donatable. So I guess I'd like for both of you to kind of talk about food rescue from restaurants and what the particular details are surrounding that. Apparently there are some specifics that with food that can and cannot be donated and rescued. And if there's any legislation or any attempt to change those rules.
Yeah, I mean, from a food rescue standpoint, once the food has left the kitchen and goes to a buffet and becomes accessible to the general public, we cannot rescue it and introduce it into the food redistribution system. The risks are way too high, and there are so many ways that foodborne disease and other allergens getting mixed in with the wrong foods, et cetera. There are so many risks to public safety. The best way to do it is to just not do buffets, or to do buffets that are carefully sculpted to have the exact amount of food needed so that everything gets consumed. But Generally speaking, we have launched a Meal Connect app, which looks like that, and it's available on the iPhone and Android app stores. And it is a virtual food bank, or a food bank in the cloud. It's a great innovation that allows occasional food donors like restaurants or hotels or catering firms to use that app, take a picture of the food, answer a couple of data points, and then our trained volunteers who have special equipment in their cars are dispatched to the restaurant or other location to rescue that food. And they are electronically matched to a nearby charity within proximity of the restaurant who's ready to receive the food. So Meal Connect, unlike some food rescue apps, Meal Connect is completely free. And we have trained volunteers now all over San Diego County. And it's just a great opportunity for people that can't do scheduled food rescue. They can't have a truck come every day because they don't have enough consistency of supply. These occasional or intermittent donors can now access it, and it's incredibly cost efficient because the food is not coming to a central warehouse. It's a food bank in the cloud, and it goes from the donor to a food runner's car to a receiving charity, usually within an hour. So it's a very quick and efficient way to rescue that kind of food.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity, that app. I'm taking notes here. We'll provide it for our attendees later.
The app is for the donors. The volunteers who want to volunteer have to come to feedingsandiego.org/mealconnect.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, I think this question and Vincent's answer really speaks to the prepared food donation aspect of food rescue or food recovery. Typically we think of fresh rescue, which is, the fruits and vegetables or any fresh produce from a farmer's market or grocery store. And I think as a region, prepared food donation is still an area that we really haven't done much work about and can really continue to think about, are there ways to safely encourage and facilitate prepared food donation? Within our wasted food prevention program, we recently wrapped up a pilot program called Smart Kitchen San Diego, where we worked with 15 of San Diego's largest institutions, so restaurants, hotels, casinos, universities, hospitals, and installed food waste tracking technology in their kitchens to kind of help them, see what food waste is being generated from their service, but then also connecting them with nonprofit partners and creating protocols and safe transportation strategies for them to be able to donate any of that excess food to those nonprofit partners.
Just directly.
Directly. So the nonprofit partners were given kind of the large trucks for transportation, and we really were able to identify which pans were the most effective in order to donate that food. The temperature and food safety component was all incorporated. So I think that that's something that is, an emerging conversation. To your point about legislation and things kind of at the more policy level addressing this, in California specifically, AB 1219, or the California Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, actually protects food donors from any kind of liability, for donating excess food if it was made in good faith. And I think for restaurants or a lot of food donors, that's always the big fear is, will I be liable if my donated food, if, for any reason makes someone sick or something happens to it? So this is actually California specific, but there's also a federal Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act. So these are kind of policy initiatives on the state and federal levels to help encourage food donation, whether it's prepared or otherwise, and really to kind of break this barrier between food donors, not donating food because of this perceived fear of liability. As far as we know, there's currently no active lawsuits or knowledge of a lawsuit against a food donor for donating food, again, if it was in good faith. So there are kind of some policy or legislative pieces that really kind of speak to this food donation piece.
Okay, great, that's good to know. Well, so this next question is similar to one that was asked prior to the start of this program today. And it's been asked since this program has begun. So I just want to go ahead and throw it out there. Perhaps the two of you could just delineate and define the relationship between your two organizations. That, like I said, that question's come up twice now. So could you both speak to that, or one of you speak to that?
We're one of the founding members of the Food System Alliance, but the Food System Alliance is an umbrella organization encompassing lots of different sectors of the economy that are working around reforming and enhancing and improving the food system. But the Food System Alliance does not do what we do, which is to directly operate food distribution or to directly rescue food there's a, you know, we provide over 26 million meals per year across San Diego County to families in need. And we view the Food System Alliance as being a vital and important strategic partner in that because of this longer term policy-based approach that is really helping us to understand where we as an organization can grow to meet the evolving needs of the community.
Yeah, so the Alliance really, just as Vince said, the Alliance really is seeking to elevate the work of all of these great direct service organizations like Feeding San Diego, on all of the other organizations and partners within our network. So again, we aren't a direct service organization. We aren't doing any direct food recovery or food distribution, but we really are seeking to bring together the different stakeholders and partners working on these issues to help catalyze transformation and influence policy long-term on these food system issues.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that extra information. And so again, one of our attendees is very interested in your knowledge of the World Central Kitchen and Jose Andres. I know I mentioned that earlier, but that question's popped up again. So that's a very, that's a point of interest for one of our attendees. So if that can be our last question, if you'd like to comment on World Central Kitchen and whether or not you know Jose Andres, that would be delightful.
Sarah, do you have a
I don't know if I have anything to add for this. I mean, again, since we're not, a direct service organization, specifically, Vince, I don't know if Feeding San Diego has any kind of thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, honestly, I'm not familiar with the program.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have a presence here in San Diego County because I feel like it's very dangerous to say I would know, but I think I would know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you both for the time that you've spent with us today and more importantly, the good work that you do in our community, keeping our community members safe and healthy and fed and providing services and products that just make this a better place to live. I mean, we have never needed your presence more than we've needed it recently. And I love the way that everything has continued to go forward and be workable, and you found solutions during this pandemic to help make our community members active and safe during this episode.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We are going to put up on the screen now a little graphic that kind of gives our viewers an opportunity to see your websites. So if they didn't get a chance to jot them down earlier, your websites are on here. I had mentioned earlier in our introduction about the census, which is incredibly important for redistricting and the redistricting commission information as well. So I'm just going to leave this up there for a second. And with that, I want to say goodbye to all of our attendees and to thank Vince, Sarah and Elly, and to just welcome everybody back for our next luncheon and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.